everyone, Crow here, and man, it's been a while since we looked at our last Evercade collection. It's been like 4 months. But with the Founders Edition of the Evercade VS I received in early December, I also got the next 6 collections, and I didn't want to start talking about them until I played every single last game on all of them. So I've done that, and now we can kick it off again by taking a look at the games included on this, Cartridge 21, the Intellivision Collection 1. It includes 12 games from the console, which was originally released by Mattel in 1979. In 1984, Mattel sold the Intellivision assets to a former Mattel Electronics executive, along with some investors in what would eventually be known as INTV Corporation. The Intellivision was eventually discontinued in 1990. Most of the games in this collection are Intellivision classics, but the conversion of controls to a standard gamepad may be an issue due to the original Intellivision controller inclusion of a keypad and games that had overlays for that keypad. The Evercade emulation attempts to compensate for this by allowing you to hold a button to bring up a virtual keypad, but how well does that actually work? So, not only will I give a brief description about each game, but we'll see if the controls wind up being an issue as well. But before we start with our first game, I would normally explain how I rate the games on a scale from 1 to 5. But I'm going to stop doing that because I don't want it to seem like I'm giving these games an arbitrary score. If I liked the game, I was giving it a 4 or 5. If I was indifferent, I was giving it a 3. And if I didn't like it, I was giving it a 1 or a 2. So rather than hide what I really mean behind a number, I'm just going to simplify things and just indicate whether I liked the game or I didn't like the game or I was just indifferent towards it. Near the end of the video, I will rank the games from my least favorite to most favorite. So, let's get started with our first game. Originally released in 1981, Astrosmash started out as an Asteroids clone called Meteor. Since the game was so small in size, a game variant called Avalanche was created that used the same game assets. Before it was released, Mattel's lawyers became concerned that Atari would sue due to Meteor being too similar to Asteroids, so it was decided to remove that game, and Avalanche became Astrosmash. An interesting bit of information is that the Meteor code is still in the Astrosmash cartridge because it was actually never removed. All they really did was just bypass the menu screen and boot directly into Astrosmash. The reason this was done was to eliminate any chances that new bugs would pop up by removing the Meteor code. It's easy to see the Asteroids' influence in Astrosmash, as the game feels like a combination of Space Invaders and Asteroids. You control a gun at the bottom of the screen that can only move left or right and has a hyperspace ability to randomly teleport somewhere else on the screen. But instead of shooting invading aliens, you're shooting at chunks of rocks falling from the sky. The big rocks even break apart into smaller rocks when hit. But it's just not rocks falling from the sky, as there's also spinning bombs and guided missiles as well. As an added incentive for shooting these objects, each one has a negative effect if you let them hit the ground. You'll lose points for every rock that hits the ground. The spinning bombs hitting the ground will result in an immediate loss of your gun, and coincidentally, losing a gun also results in a reduction of points. And finally, not only will the guided missiles head right for you as they're falling, but they'll chase you on the ground as well. The only way to avoid losing your gun once a guided missile reaches the ground is to use the hyperspace ability and hopefully teleport out of the way. The game's difficulty increases as your score goes up, and at certain score thresholds, the level will change, indicated by the color of the sky changing, and the point values are multiplied. At a certain point, UFOs will start appearing and start attacking as well. What's interesting is that since you lose points for letting meteors hit the ground or losing a life, it's possible to revert back to a previous level. And just as the game gets harder the more your score goes up, it also gets easier when your score goes down as well. I played this game on an original Intellivision and found the game to be just okay. There were 2 problems I had with this game. The first is that one game can take a really long time, and secondly, I found the Intellivision controller to be very uncomfortable after a lengthy amount of time playing this game. For every 1,000 points, you'll earn an extra gun, so you can build up quite a stockpile of extra lives. Turning autofire on helps immensely, but you'll still have to hit the side buttons if you want to fire more quickly. On the Evercade, however, since the controls are so much more comfortable, I found myself enjoying the game much more than I used to. Even on my first game in this collection, I did way better than I ever did on the original hardware. I really liked this one. On a side note, there is an Atari 2600 version of this game called Astro Blast that uses the PAL controllers. Buzz Bombers, released in 1983, was Mattel's answer to Centipede. Rather than centipedes, however, it's bees descending the screen, and you're shooting them with a spray can of repellent. When a bee gets hit, it'll turn into a honeycomb. If the hummingbird that's flying around discovers the honeycomb, it'll eat it, giving you more points. If you shoot the hummingbird too many times, it'll get sick and leave the screen for a while. If a bee reaches the bottom of the screen, it'll pollinate some flowers, and that will restrict your movement. If you can trap a bee between some honeycomb, it'll turn into a beehive and give you some bonus points at the end of the level. There are white killer bees that'll occasionally appear, and they are faster and will fly through honeycombs. However, if you can hit them, they'll turn into an orange honeycomb that's worth even more points if the hummingbird eats it. The one last detail to be aware of is that your spray can has a limited amount of shots, but will be refilled every level. But if you use up all those shots in a spray can, you'll lose it. You'll also lose a spray can if you get completely walled in by flowers. This was one I used to own several years back, and personally I kind of like this game, but I could also find it to be frustrating at times, and this time it's not because of the Intellivision controller. For some reason, sometimes I'll just have trouble hitting the bees. I don't know if it's because I'm not in the position where I think I am, or if just my timing is bad, but firing many shots into a swarm of bees without a hit is a bit irritating. Lining up shots can be frustrating as well because the bees don't constantly move. Sometimes they just stop, and that can throw you off as well. Nothing is as irritating as when you take a shot, but then the hummingbird flies right in front of it and gets hit instead. What's really annoying though is when there are a lot of flowers on the ground and the space you can move is very limited, but the hummingbird just decides to hover right above you for a while. It's also a bit annoying that the music goes completely silent every time a sound effect is played. Ultimately, this is a game I like, but I do get frustrated with it from time to time. Frog Bog is a really simple game that was released in 1982. You and another frog are sitting on some lily pads and leap in the air to catch bugs as they fly by. Different bugs are worth different amounts of points. Games last 3 minutes long and take place from day to dusk, or at night until the moon disappears from sight. The frog with the most points at the end wins. There are 3 difficulty settings to control the frog. In the easiest setting, you simply hit the directional pad and the frog will automatically hop back and forth in a predetermined path and will automatically attempt to catch flies he gets near. The medium control setting has you controlling the frog directly, but he'll still automatically attempt to catch the flies he gets near. The hardest control setting has you controlling the frog's movements and his tongue. The easiest control setting I find to be too boring. I mean, it's just hopping back and forth with no control other than that. It's kind of irritating that you can't control the tongue in this mode, because often there seems like there are opportunities to catch flies, but the frog never deploys his tongue. In the other 2 modes where you do control the frog, I can't really get a handle on it. How the frog jumps is determined by how long you hold the D-pad down, but the frog rarely jumps the way I expect him to, and he'll often jump right into the water, losing time in the process. Sometimes the frog will jump in the opposite direction I expect him to. I'm sure there's something with the controls I'm not grasping, but regardless of how I play this game, I don't feel like I have control. Now, I don't dislike this game, but I don't really have too much fun playing it either. I'm just neutral on this one. Finally, I just want to mention that a version of this game was released on the Atari 2600 called Frogs and Flies. Released in 1982, the premise of Night Stalker is that you're trapped in a maze with bats, spiders, and killer robots. Contact with the bats and spiders will stun you, but the robots will kill you with their shots if they hit you. To defend yourself, you'll need to find the gun in the maze, and this will give you 6 shots to use against the bats, spiders, and robots. Once all your shots are used up, you'll be defenseless again until you find another gun. As your score increases, more deadlier robots will start to appear, some of which can take up to 3 shots before they're destroyed. The only safe spot in the map is the bunker where you start. However, that's not even safe once the robot with the bunker-busting bullets starts appearing. This is another one of those games where the action starts out pretty slowly. The robots always spawn in the same spot, so it's pretty easy to destroy them as soon as they spawn, at least at the beginning of the game. Things don't really start to pick up until the robots that need 3 shots to destroy start appearing. And then the challenge really begins when the black robot with the energy bolts starts appearing. This game always controlled really well because you don't shoot in the direction you're facing. Rather, the Intellivision keypad was used to fire in the directions up, down, left, and right, regardless of which way you were facing. Kind of like a dual-stick shooter. On the Evercade, the control is made better by the fact that the standard array of 4 buttons works perfectly for this, and you don't have to hold your hands awkwardly on the controller to play. Part of the problem I had with this game with the Intellivision controller is that my hand would sometimes move unknowingly on the keypad, and I'd start to hit the wrong buttons for firing on accident. But on a more standard controller, this isn't an issue for me. For the game itself, the animations on your character are very well done, and the sound effects for this game are excellent and really add to the atmosphere. The 2 negatives I have about this game is that it can take a while for the action to really gear up. It can take up to 10 minutes or more before the black robots start showing up to make things more interesting. The other thing is that I kind of wish there was more than just one maze layout. Despite these negatives, however, I still really like this game. As a bit of trivia, the spider in this game was originally programmed to leave spiderwebs throughout the maze that would slow you down. However, when an extra tougher robot needed to be added, the spiderwebs had to be taken out due to memory restraints. A version of this game was also released on the Atari 2600 as Dark Cavern. Intellivision's Pinball was in development for longer than most other Intellivision games. Development began in 1981, but the game wasn't released until 1983. Oddly enough, this is a game I'd never played before this collection, and I knew very little about it, so everything here was completely new to me. Now, when playing a pinball game from this era, I feel that we really can't judge the game based on how realistic the physics are, but rather just how fun the game is in a general sense. This pinball game doesn't seem to have any particular theming, but there are animals that pop up here and there. You get 5 balls per game, but what really surprised me is that there's multiple levels of playfields. From the starting point of the green lower playfield, you could work your way up to the red middle playfield, and then up to the highest blue playfield. Losing the ball on the blue playfield will send you back to the red, and losing the ball there sends you back to the green, and losing a ball there will actually result in a lost ball. On the green playfield, you can lose the ball pretty quickly in the outlanes if you're not careful. Hitting the 2 white dots at the top will cause a hole to appear, and hitting that will send you to the red playfield. On the red playfield, hitting the 2 flashing yellow targets on the right side will make a hole appear, and that'll send you to the blue playfield. It took me a bit of time to figure out the timing of the flippers, but once I figured out how to aim properly and how to avoid draining in those outlanes so often, the game grew on me pretty quickly. The controls for this game on an Intellivision controller make sense, but by default they don't translate very well on a more modern controller. I mean, the left and right flippers wind up being controlled on the A and B buttons, and that's pretty awkward. Fortunately, with the Evercade VS, you can remap the buttons if you want, but since that's more of a universal thing, you'll have to remap the controller every time you just want to play this game and have to set it back to default when you're done. The other odd thing about this pinball game is that you can't nudge left or right. You can only nudge up. But despite this, the game really grew on me in a short amount of time, and I really enjoyed playing this one. Princess Quest is the only homebrew game in this collection, and it was developed by Oscar Toledo Gutierrez in 2015. So this makes it the most recent game here, by about 30 years. The game is a run-and-gun platformer of sorts that really gives me a Ghosts and Goblins vibe. The story is the basic knight off to rescue a princess. Your knight can only fire straight ahead, but he can find hidden chests which can sometimes contain a new weapon. There are 5 levels to cover, each with a different environment: the desert, the forest, the cemetery, the caves, and finally the castle. Each level has monsters specific to that area, as well as a unique boss to defeat. Now before I continue, I just want to bring up how insane that all of this is in an Intellivision game. Not only that, but the game plays incredibly smooth, and there's constant background music that doesn't get interrupted by other sound effects, like in Buzz Bombers, for example. I found the game to be incredibly fair as well. Because everything is so big, you will get hit pretty often. But you can get hit 9 times before losing a life, and you can collect hearts from defeated monsters to restore some health. When you get hit, there's no knockback as well, just a brief window of invincibility. Even when you die, you just get resurrected right there on the spot. The only downside is that you'll lose your upgraded weapon if you have one. The game's last 2 levels can feel a bit unfair at times though. Both of them are vertical climbs, and often stuff will fall on you that there's no way you could have avoided. But if you're good enough on the first 3 levels, you should have enough lives to power your way through the rest of the game. This was an incredibly fun surprise to see in this collection, and I really enjoyed playing it. Shark Shark is a game of survival of the fittest that was released in 1982. You start out as a little fish in the big ocean, and you'll swim around looking for smaller fish to eat while avoid being eaten by the fish bigger than you. Eat enough and you'll grow in size, up to 5 sizes in total. But no matter how big you are, the sharks can always eat you. However, you are able to take out a shark if you nibble his tail enough times. You can do this even in your smallest form, but the smaller you are, the more bites will be needed to take the shark out. And it's not exactly easy, as the shark just may turn around and eat you. Your reward for taking out the shark is an extra life. That's basically the whole game, aside from the crab that crawls at the bottom of the screen and jumps up trying to get you. The only way to take him out is on his way back down, and only if you're big enough to do so. You could play this game the safe way and just go after the little fish and avoid the sharks at all costs, but I find that going after the shark and taking it out is probably my favorite thing about this game. The safest way to go about it is to be just above or below the shark as it swims by and go straight up and down to get his tail, because every time you get it, he'll turn right around. So if you try and bite his tail by going directly behind him, the second you nip at his tail, he'll turn around and eat you. But by going up and down, when he turns around, you'll be above or below him and be able to get his tail again really quickly. If you can repeat this, he'll go down pretty fast. Eating the smaller fish is fun too, but I always like going after the shark. There is a 2-player mode as well, but I don't think I've ever played this with another person. The game is fun, relaxing, and the little game over tune at the end is pretty cool as well. This was one of my favorite games in my Intellivision collection. NHL Hockey was released in 1980, but this isn't NHL Hockey, but a very similar game called Slapshot Super Pro Hockey that was released 7 years later. In fact, it's practically the same game with some minor graphical differences, computer-controlled opponents so one player can play, and some control alterations, which is the source of an issue here that I'll get into later. This is a really basic game of hockey, with each team having 4 players, including the goalie. You'll always control the player with the puck, and if the other team is in control, you can tap a button to cycle through your players. The goalie is the only player you can't control, and I think that's just fine. I mean, I think the computer probably does a better job than I would. There really are no rules to break, however, the game will throw a player in the penalty box from time to time. When you boot up the game, you'll first indicate whether or not the first team is computer-controlled or a human player, and then the level of difficulty, and then repeat the same for the other team. And that's it! The game just immediately starts after that. It would have been nice to select how long each period would be though, because a full game takes about 50 minutes in real time. In the game that I played, when the players went onto the ice for the first time, my goalie got stuck in his own net for 2 minutes before he freed himself and the game could actually begin. In this game, the players can get hung up in the net from time to time, but it was quite ridiculous that he got stuck in the net before the game even began. This game really falls apart in the controls though. This is the one game in the collection that really requires the keypad as a gameplay element. You see, there's not one pass button in this game. There are 8 pass buttons, and they're all mapped to the keypad. The idea being that you'd hit the button corresponding to the direction you'd want to pass. That may have worked fine with the original controller on the original system, but on the Evercade we don't have enough buttons on the controller for that, So if you want to pass, you'll have to bring up the virtual keypad, navigate to the number corresponding to the direction you want to pass, and then hit A. The problem is that by the time you do all that, you'll no longer have the puck. Even if you did, the window for making the pass work would be long gone. Funnily enough, NHL Hockey, the original version of this game, had just one pass button and one shoot button, and they weren't mapped to the keypad. Instead, this version of the game uses those same buttons for a slap shot and a super slap shot. Basically, all this means is to hit the puck and to hit the puck even harder. I suppose these buttons can be used for passing and shooting the puck, but the problem is that you'll only hit the puck in the same direction your player is moving. So the game just devolves into having a player get the puck, skate straight at the goal, and shoot. And repeat. For almost an hour straight. Another oddity is that if you want to change the player you're controlling, you have to make sure you're not pushing the D-pad when you're hitting the button, because it won't work. This is because that button on the Intellivision controller was also on the keypad, and you couldn't use the D-pad and the keypad at the same time. I didn't like this one, but at least it's still playable even with the lack of control. The only thing I did find amusing was when the goalie would get hit by the puck so hard that he'd be knocked off his feet for a few moments. Snafu was released in 1981 and actually includes 2 main game modes with a variety of game variations for each. In fact, the game was developed with the working title being Blockade plus Snakes. The Blockade mode has you select between 2 and 4 snakes to have in the playfield, and all the snakes are initially only 1 block in length. When the game starts, each player's snake grows in unison, leaving a trail behind. The goal is to navigate the screen avoiding everyone's trail, including your own. If you get hit by a trail or a wall, you're out of the game. The winner is the last one standing. If you're familiar with the movie Tron and the life cycles, this may sound familiar. There are a total of 12 different game variations here, with the options of the number of players, whether or not the snakes can move diagonally, if there are additional obstacles on the playfield, or if a downed snake's trail stays on the screen or disappears. Before the beginning of each game, you can decide how many rounds to play. If you're playing single player, the remaining 3 snakes will be controlled by the computer. However, even in a 4-snake game, only 2 players maximum can play. The snakes mode is a bit different in that each player's snake starts at a set length and doesn't grow as it moves. Rather, you try to bite the tail of the opponent's snake. When a tail is bitten, that snake shrinks in size. The winner is the one left after the other player is gone. Unlike the Blockade mode, the snake games are only for 2 players. There are always 2 snakes in this mode, and if you're the only one playing, the computer won't control the other snake. That's actually what you're seeing in the footage right now. There are only 4 game variations in this mode, with the only option being if you can move diagonally or not, or if there was obstacles on the playfield. I do like this game overall, though I do wish it would allow for 4 players to play in the modes that have 4 snakes. It's understandable why it doesn't have that option though, and that's because the Intellivision only had 2 hardwired controllers. However, this game never really holds my interest for very long. I'm also not a big fan of the snakes mode, and I think that the game variations that allow for diagonal movements are very weird. I do like the catchy music that plays when a game nears its conclusion though. It's a neat feature, and the Evercade manual says that this is the first game with theme music, but I don't know how true that actually is. I like this game, but there's just something about it that doesn't make me want to play it very often. Oh, and if you're wondering why the game is called Snafu, that's because it's a military acronym for Situation Normal, all up. Thin Ice stars Duncan, the ice-skating penguin, and was basically completed in 1983. But due to management meddling at Mattel, the game wasn't released until 1986 by INTV Corporation. I've heard people say that this game reminds them of Kicks, but it's actually a variation of the Data East game Disco Number 1, a game where a guy roller skates around disco girls in order to impress them. It was thought that the gameplay was fun, But for the Intellivision, they also thought that the game should be more family friendly. So the premise of the game was altered to be a penguin who ice skates around his friends, breaking the ice and sending them into the icy waters. Now, is it just me, but doesn't this make Duncan sound like he's some kind of jerk? Well, regardless, the goal is to sink all of your penguin friends into the water. It's not all that easy though, as there's a crazy seal that'll erase your lines as you're creating them, and if he touches you, you'll lose a life. As you get higher in the levels, the polar bears will start to show up, and they'll start increasing in numbers and in speed. Touching a polar bear will also lose a life, but they won't actively go after Duncan. Fortunately, you can temporarily freeze the polar bears a set number of times if you think you might run into them. There are 2 items Duncan can collect to help him out. There are shrimp cocktails that'll make him go faster, though I originally thought that those were chalices of fire, and there are also lobsters that'll give you an extra life if you catch them. It honestly took me a while to figure out how to play this game. I knew I had to circle the penguins, but my lines kept disappearing and I couldn't figure out why. And then I figured it out. As you're making the 3rd line in a square, your first line will disappear the moment the 3rd line becomes longer than the first line. Then I had to figure out how to deal with the seal. He moves quickly and erratically, and if he comes into contact with any of your skate lines, he'll start to go after you, erasing all the lines as he follows them. Then I figured out you can stun him if you make the line he's on disappear, either by turning the wrong way or skating right into the water yourself. Eventually I figured out that you can sometimes dunk him in the water, it just depends on what line he's on when you complete a square. It's also better to let the seal catch onto your trail because at least you'll know where he's going. Otherwise I've found that he'll just randomly show up in your face in an instant, taking one of your lives. Once I figured out how to play the game, I quite liked it. But even though I had a strategy for dealing with the seal, I feel like he moves way too fast and crazily right from the beginning of the game. Sometimes you could be doing your best to stay far away from him, but 2 seconds later he's right there, and it could get kind of frustrating. Finally, I just want to mention that this was not exactly the version of Thin Ice that was released on cartridge in 1986. That cartridge was 8K in size and had some elements cut out of it in order to fit, but the version we're getting here on the Evercade is the 16K version, which includes some bonus screens of Duncan and his friends while the game is in a track mode. The genesis of Thunder Castle started in 1982 from an internal competition for the best game idea with a magic theme. In fact, the game was originally going to be called Magic Castle. However, work on the game would constantly be interrupted by other projects, and it took over a year to have the game near completion. By that time, the game was known as Mystic Castle. After some final touches and another name change to Thunder Castle, the game was ready. However, just before production, Mattel Electronics closed its doors, so just like Thin Ice, it wasn't released until 1986 by INTV Corporation. As the game starts, you'll control a knight in a maze-like forest outside of Thunder Castle. And you must defeat the 3 dragons that guard it one at a time. Once the 3rd dragon is defeated, access to the castle is granted, and level 2 has the knight navigating the maze-like corridors on a mission to defeat the 6 wizards, with a maximum of 2 wizards on the screen at any one time. After the 6th wizard is defeated, it's onward to the castle dungeons, which of course is like a maze. But the mission here is to defeat 9 demons, with a maximum of 3 appearing on the screen at any one time. After the demons are defeated, the cycle repeats with the enemies getting faster and with changes to the mazes. Well, how do you defeat the dragons, wizards, and demons though? If you touch them, you'll die. On each level, there's an item or creature roaming the maze that can be touched that will energize your knight for a short amount of time. Touch the enemies while energized, and that'll take them down. It's not all that easy though, because the enemies aren't stupid. Just as they'll chase you down if they see you in the maze, they'll also run from you if you're powered up. Well, one thing about the mazes I haven't mentioned yet is that they're continually changing, with sections of the wall appearing and disappearing. So, with some planning, you can corner the enemies, giving them nowhere to run. But you've got to be careful, because the same thing can happen to you. There are some items that randomly appear in the maze, and if you can get to them before they disappear, you can use them when you need them. The Grail will energize you instantly. The Crown will freeze enemies for a short time. The Necklace will speed you up temporarily. The Lantern will extend the time you're energized. The Key will let you pass through a wall, and the Ring will teleport you somewhere randomly in the maze. You have to just keep in mind that you can only hold one item at a time. There are some items that appear with instant effects though, and those include a stack of coins that will give you 500 points, a candlestick that'll give you an extra life, and a comb that will cut your score in half. And that's the only item in the game you don't want to touch. I'd never played this one before, and I was really impressed by the music and sound effects in this game, particularly the crack of thunder that occurs whenever a new enemy appears on the screen. The screen that introduces each level is pretty impressive for the Intellivision as well. I also really enjoyed the gameplay. It's kind of like Pac-Man in a way, with how you need to find an object and then have a short amount of time to take out the enemies. The shifting maze is a great element as well. The only thing I find annoying is the comb. I understand that having an item with a negative effect makes things a little bit more interesting, but I think that losing half of your score is too much of a punishment. If it happens to be in the path of your only escape route, your options are to take it and lose half your score, or lose a life. And if you have a really high score, you might just want to lose a life. Regardless, I thought the game was fantastic. The final game in the collection is Word Rockets, and it's kind of an oddity here because it was never released as a standalone game. Word Rockets was actually one of 3 selectable games in the 1980 release, the Electric Company Word Fun, alongside Find a Word and Word Hunt. Word Rockets was also included in the 1987 release of the Learning Fun 2 cartridge, alongside Crosswords, Word Hunt, and Memory Fun. In Word Rockets, 2 letters with a gap in between them will float across the screen at random heights and speeds. It's up to you to select one of the 4 vowels on the ground, pick it up, and fire it up to the letters to spell a word. If the word is valid, you'll get a point. If not, the letter bounces away. The vowels you take at the bottom of the screen are always replaced with another random vowel. If you shoot and miss, you'll very rarely have enough time to grab another vowel and fire it before the letters disappear off the screen. The game stops when you successfully create 25 words. Well, it does when a single player plays, so I guess the point of the game is to try and create 25 words as quickly as you can. If 2 players are playing, I'm not sure if it's the first to 25 wins, or if the game stops when a combined total of 25 words are spelled. I didn't play this with anyone else, and I really didn't want to spend time to test this out by controlling both rocket launchers myself. I'll be honest here, this is a super dud of a game in this collection. It's incredibly boring, and there's no music, so there's just dead silence between the sparse sound effects. It's also kind of annoying that there's actually no 1 or 2 player modes. There's always just 2 launchers, and if you're playing alone, the second launcher just sits there waiting to be controlled. Also, this game was originally released as part of an educational compilation of games on a single cartridge. So why not include everything in Word Fun or Learning Fun 2? I really don't understand why not. To me, this is a fraction of a previously released game, and not a very fun one at that. I really didn't like this one. So that's all 12 games in the Intellivision Collection 1. So where would I rank them? Well, it should come as no surprise that Word Rockets is my least favorite for reasons like not really being much fun, but also because it's only a portion of a full Intellivision game. At number 11, we've got Slapshot Super Pro Hockey, primarily for being a bit slow and glitchy, but also because passing is next to impossible. Number 10 is Frog Bog, because not only am I a bit indifferent to it, but because I find the frog control very difficult. At number 9 is Snafu, a game I actually do like, but I can't really put it above anything else on the rest of this list. Number 8 is Buzz Bombers, Intellivision's answer to Centipede, which is a fun game but has some annoying quirks. Number 7 is Thin Ice. It's a fun game, but I'd wish that seal would just calm down a little bit. Number 6 is Pinball, a really good multi-level pinball game for the time of release, but the lack of right or left nudging is a bit strange. Number 5 is Shark Shark, one of my favorites on the Intellivision, but really it's just because I like seeing how many times I can take out the shark. At number 4 is Night Stalker, a game of hide and seek with robot monsters that actually takes quite a while to get challenging. Number 3 is Astrosmash, a game that I like way more using a standard controller over the Intellivisions. At number 2 I've got Princess Quest, the homebrew run and gun platforming game from 2015 that runs surprisingly well on Intellivision hardware. And finally, my favorite game of the collection, Thunder Castle. A game I'd never played before, but features great visuals and music in a compelling hunt or be hunted maze chase. And that's gonna wrap things up for this video. The next Evercade video will be on cartridge 22, the Bitmap Brothers Collection 1. See ya next time.